organisations, as well as 16 organisations funded by the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. And some of the key findings of that survey include that a majority of organisations surveyed made pledges on social media about anti-racism and since have increased their ethnic diversity in their boards and in their commissions and artistic programming. However, there has been very little change in terms of the ethnic diversity of wider staff. Also, less ethnically diverse organisations are still receiving strong ratings in the creative case for diversity. Last year, Inclusive Cinema also commissioned the Dismantling Structural Inequality in Your Cinema Toolkit, which was a practical guide for improving the experiences of people of colour audiences, staff and filmmakers, and the other taking into consideration the other intersections that those communities also hold in terms of race, in terms of disability, class, etc., and encourage in a reflective and dialogue-based work around undoing systemic injustice. So it's clear that anti-racism is firmly on people's agendas these days. That being said, as organisations are kind of moving beyond the statements that they made over the past 2 years and into the action and enacting those statements, we need to take some time to reflect and look at constantly keeping these organisations accountable and having conversations around what that can look like. And hopefully this conversation will be a part of that as well. So what I'm actually going to do is to kick off our panel discussion, I'm going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves and share a bit of their context around anti-racism, and then we'll get started with the questions. Isra, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. Visual description is I'm an Arab woman with brown curly hair and I'm wearing glasses. I've got brown eyes and I'm wearing a black top. And my background is in cinemas, venues and community spaces, and often my work was about community engagement and trying to reach a wider audience, but also making sure that the space is as inclusive as possible. During the pandemic, I left the venue life and have gone freelance to do, I work with outreach and communication with quite a lot of organisations. I'm also focusing on tape, which I
sorry guys, hey Duncan, sorry. Grabbing.
Let's go. Which I co-founded a few years ago. And TAPE is a cross arts collective which curates and produces and distributes films and does sort of experiments a bit in terms of what we can do in exhibition. And there's a focus on exploring identity and heritage in the work. So there's quite a lot of work by, mainly the focus is women of colour. And I'm also involved with Habibi Collective, which is an organisation run by women from the MENA region. And I've also worked with Inclusive Cinema. So I've worked with in terms of trying to make organisations more inclusive and trying to have conversations about diversifying organisations.
Thank you. Rosha, would you mind going next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rosha Gowan. I use the pronouns she, her. I work as the artistic director of Arts Admin. In terms of visual description, I'm a white woman. I'm aged 41, unfortunately. I have reddish, blondish hair. I'm wearing a heather tweed cape because it's very cold here in my office. And I was appointed to work at Arts Admin in 2019, taking over from the founding director of Arts Admin, Judith Knight, who founded Arts Admin in 1979. And we're a producing arts organisation working in the kind of space between forum and producing work locally, nationally and internationally. Since I was appointed, I suppose anti-racism has been central to the work that we've been doing here at Arts Admin in terms of reviewing where we are as an organisation and planning for the next 4-year strategic plan for the organisation.
Shona, could you go next?
Hi, my name is Shona Daly. I am the Executive Director at Glasgow Film. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with blonde hair. I'm wearing a grey top, and I just had to move rooms because somebody's decided to drill above me on the ceiling in my bedroom. So sorry if that was distracting as I made my way through the house there. So Glasgow Film is a three-screen cinema based in Glasgow. We're currently the home to Film Hub Scotland. We also run the Glasgow Film Festival, Glasgow Youth Film Festival, and we have quite a large programme of education, annual education work and equalities programming as well. We are prepping for a new strategic plan as well, and my role on the executive is to lead the development of our new equalities, diversity and inclusion strand. And although I wouldn't say I've ever worked in a sort of public facing or right on the sort of front in equalities, I've had responsibility for supporting staff in various organisations to drive forward that work. And so our commitments to anti-racism, I suppose, first came to fruition in August 2020. And then we provided an update in March 21, and we're working towards another update, hopefully after the film festival in March. And I can talk a wee bit about that later as we go on. Thanks.
Shall I go? Yeah. Hey everybody, my name is Tony. I'm part of the team at Watershed Bristol. Watershed is a cinema space with a bar cafe. It's also home to a community of people as part of the Pervasive Media Studio, which is a partnership between Watershed and the local universities, all based around questions around creative technology and art and civic engagement, and how we bring all of those things together in creative research projects to ask big questions about how the world works and how it could work better and how creative technology can be a part of that. Watershed made some pretty big statements around Black Lives Matter, and we are in the process of working through those. I'm excited to talk through some of those with you today. My specific job, so I'm a producer, but I wear a hat called Inclusion Producer, which is a bit of a clunky title, but I work on a programme called Bristol and Bath Creative R&D, which is specifically about looking at how creative technology and the future of creative technology in Bristol and Bath can help to shape the economy and how we can grow that network and the community around it through supporting researchers both inside and outside of universities, but also prototypes and things as well. So yeah, that's my role.
Thank you all. So just to kick us off really, I wanted to start by reflecting on anti-racist statements, and if you could all kind of share your thoughts and feelings on how you feel like these statements should differ from previous statements that connect or are commenting on kind of committing to inclusion and diversity, and if you actually see that kind of happening and coming to fruition with the anti-racist statements that your organisations are working with, or organisations that you work with are working towards.
I'm happy to say something if that's okay. Yeah, I think I was just looking back there, sorry, when I saw that question, like at our different statements that we have online. And I think the big difference is that we've been really clear about deadlines and timelines and commitments, whereas we wouldn't necessarily have done that before, I don't think. You know, I joined the organisation again fairly recently, so hopefully I'm not saying, something that's incorrect, but we wouldn't have put by this date, we will do this. So there's definitely, in our statement anyway, more of an acknowledgement of the urgency and the need to be much more specific and be willing to be held accountable by other people, I think, as well.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think just to go on the back of what Sinead was saying there, I think there's something about the specificity of it and kind of the very intentional statements, which is possibly the thing that I think has moved it on. So much of, especially inclusion work and EDI work, can be about trying to make everything for everyone all of the time and just to make it all lovely. And actually that's not the case. Sometimes we have to be really specific in speaking to the people that we're trying to talk to connect with them, and to come up with some really clear actions, as you said, Sinead, of kind of being really intentional about, look, these are the issues that we see and these are the things that we're trying to do in response to them, and kind of a commitment to ongoing comms around them and keeping people abreast of what we're doing and how we're doing it, what's working and also what's not working as well. It's not all going to work the first time and it's not all going to happen at once either. That's not to make excuses for being slow, but it's just to create the space to say that we have to keep talking about it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Rosha?
Thanks. I think that in our case at Arts Admin, because we were kind of well on our way before the murder of George Floyd, we were kind of well on our way as an organisation to creating a collaborative anti-racism strategy. And that sense of something that was co-authored over a significant period of time, in our case, about 18 months, strategy by the team meant that inherently there was a sense of there being identified areas in which we wanted to make progress, and then the creation of really clear milestones around what that would look like. And prior to that, I think that the thing that had happened for us is that we'd already made a commitment to kind of update on our progress every 6 months on our website, which by and large we have done, with some slippage. There has been some slippage, but that sense of like we need to make an update every 6 months, I think it kind of can also drive, just to reinforce what Shona said as well, it can kind of drive momentum, because you've, and then you can feel change happening as well. I think that that's been really important. And it also allows for a sense of review as you're progressing as well, because you can kind of see, well, were we correct in making that assertion before we knew what it was, and actually understanding that there's space to kind of review and reconsider as we move forwards, and that being something that everybody in the team is involved in.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add, as someone who doesn't necessarily have a core in terms of who and what I work for, is I think the statements in the beginning were quite rushed, which people also felt, and that in terms of what the difference is, I suppose there was a different kind of fear from organizations in terms of putting something out, which is what got everyone to say something. And so it's really great that things have slowed down a bit in terms of actually the process and the money put into actually developing strategies. But I also wonder in terms of, how much of, for instance, the toolkit's been, which is right there and has really interesting ways of, or has really sort of great advice in terms of the basics of tackling this. But I also wonder, who the statement's for, because if you look at audiences, they're not going to read a statement necessarily, and they're not going to attend an event or a venue because an organization's made a statement. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes it can be really tricky in terms of, because really what audiences want, or people of colour who feel separated from spaces, just want things to be less contrived. And so I'm just mindful that sometimes when we put so much work and energy into a statement or a strategy or a plan or updates, that perhaps it sort of loses its actual original intention, which is to make people comfortable. Mm-hmm. So it's not an answer, just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that I think about as well, in terms of, from my perspective as a person of colour working in the arts, I think I was kind of hyper aware of arts organisations' anti-racism statements, because it would directly impact me as somebody who's wanting to work in this sector. And I think you're right. Is it about audience? Like, who is it for? And there is a specificity in terms of being anti-racist, but maybe there's more specificity needed in terms of what is the purpose of the statements in the first place, the updates. If it's about accountability, that's a two-way kind of a thing. So you've shared what you've done, but are you also inviting others in to comment on it in a kind of a equally public way? Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're completely right there. So it feels like a weird thing to try and talk about, because then I feel like I'm still here going, oh, but Watershed isn't doing that, and we're doing this, and you end up in this oddly defensive place for it, and that's not what I'm aiming for. But just to reflect on, so Watershed was really aware of not trying to make a whole bunch of really empty statements. So we committed to doing things like we did a whole bunch of deep dive data into understanding the demographics of our staff teams and our boards and the power structures that make up us as an organisation. And those are published. You can find those online now. And it was little spots of vulnerability like that I think really pushed us to make sure that we were doing the right thing, because by the community that we work for, but also as an organisation as well. And so in doing that sort of stuff, I think we're committed to continuing to do that type of work in the way, as you were suggesting there, that we can invite people into a conversation so that people can be part of understanding who we are as a team and what we're doing, and hopefully be able to see change in a longer sense, not in that really rushed way, but in a year-on-year way. If we keep releasing that sort of data, that we should be able to keep seeing change.
Yeah, I mean, and this is kind of leads on to my next question, which again is for the whole panel, and that is, if these statements are about inviting others in, how much of these statements should speak to addressing past misdoings, and how much should it be looking forward? Like, what's the balance there? What should that be?
Just also, this is so relevant to what Tony was saying in terms of defensiveness. And I think if people could just strip that and just remove that, you'd have such a much better impact if you just went, you know what, that was really messed up what we did. Or even, the thing is, I find quite fascinating is when we're defending people who have just been wrong and done bad things, or, it's okay to, I don't know why we sort of, if it's an organization or a venue or a space, why there's such a defense for it, because we're so worried about, I think people are actually quite scared of an actual change, because they don't know what that might mean and what it might entail. And all of this comes down to power as well. Like, what if the power structure shakes up to such an extent that we cannot work at the forefront of diversity and inclusion, for example? And so I think there's a fear in those things. But again, I haven't had to do that in terms of having to sort of speak out on something that's happened in the past. But I do think that it would be beneficial moving forward, that should, in an ideal world, that's what we should be able to do, because otherwise it's just, it won't have the same impact if we're not really addressing things from the past. And because that's where the change is coming from, is to be able to actually address it and change it and to make a real impact.
If I can add, I think that acknowledgement of past, I don't think it's as simple as even acknowledging past failures, but also acknowledging current failures as well. Like in our organization, which is based in London, I mean, we did, from before 2020, we had acknowledged as an organization that we were a majority white organization, and that in the past we had done harm. And like, that doesn't change, in the sense that actually a progressive journey is we need to understand that, like, we live in a systemically racist society in a country that is actively promoting a hostile environment. That sense of understanding that when you decide to take action around a culture that has previously, whether it actively engaged in racist activity or kind of sidestepped it or looked to the side and didn't take action where it needed to. Part of moving forward is understanding that mistakes will continue to be made. And I think that's really hard for people to acknowledge as well. And something that we've tried to do as we've been on an anti-racism journey is, first of all, we never consider ourselves exemplar or doing particularly well or good at this, but understand that we're committed to doing the work. The second thing I think is that we, as part of, in the last year, like, one of the things we needed to do is to kind of really address the fear of messing up as part of something that was really challenging within our team. And so one of the things we've done is everybody has done, it's just a few people are still in the process of doing some nonviolent communication training, and that has been like really, really important to us in terms of actually being able to acknowledge, being able to have difficult conversations with each other in a way that feels supportive, and like it's not the end of the world. Like, to address an issue with someone, it's not the end of the world to be told that you've done something wrong. What matters is taking action on that, and those kind of simple human things for us have been probably the most important in terms of just acknowledging where we are, where we were, where we are, and where we hope to be.
I think just following on from that, I mean, we very much feel like we're at the very beginning of our anti-racism journey, but I think one of the kind of key learnings for us, we brought in a couple of consultants to work with us and help take us through the next steps of our commitments, because we kind of took a pause. GFT didn't rush its statement out, but it was done in response. And it was a collaborative process. The staff, the volunteers, the board all contributed to that first set of commitments. And then when we started to really look at it, we did feel we were jumping the gun a little bit, and that we needed to look at the organisation first before we started to do more external public-facing activity. GFT's got a strong collaborative programme, but we felt that but then our staff is still completely white. So where's the problem? And we didn't understand what that was. We didn't necessarily understand what being an actively anti-racist organisation even meant. So we took time to start that process. We are very much at the beginning of it. And I think that where we're at is we know that we've made mistakes in the past, and we're trying to build that confidence to be braver around, we're not always going to get this right, but if we do it together, and it is a very collaborative process with bringing the whole staff in, all our volunteers and the board and our partners, and take our time and do it properly, then hopefully those bigger projects, the stuff that we work on others with, that will have more impact, and it will have more meaningful, lasting change if we get the sort of internal organisational stuff right, and really make sure we kind of try to embed that. And I think that's one of the challenges at the moment, is moving it from being an idea of a project, that you just do a bit of fast work on and then move on. It's a daily practice. And I think that's a challenge that we're facing at the moment, but we're committed to it. It's this has to be something that we all think about every day, and is part of everybody's job. It's not just the programmer, and it's not just the person who does our community engagement projects. It's for all of us, and making sure all the managers and we all understand and feel confident, or grow that confidence together about what that means for all of us in all our different jobs.
So when in this in the balance and belonging data that I was talking about us collecting, that was an attempt in there to try and ground all of this work in the experiences that had come before of the people that work in our teams, or the people that connect in with our organisation. So kind of, it would have been really easy to have come out with a whole bunch of demographic data and be we're going to try and lift this demographic up, and we're going to try and increase that. You get into a really dangerous spot then of talking about benchmarks and tick boxing, having finished and completed things and things like that. So what we tried to do was to accompany it with some idea of what belonging looked like in an organisation. So much of inclusion strategy and recruitment strategy is about getting people in and through the door, and not really thinking about the bit that comes next. Actually, you've got to function in an office together, and you've got to share the kitchen and all of those kinds of spaces where you're going to interact. And those are the spaces where kind of all of the statements you're making, that's where they come to life, in that day-to-day sort of a space, not in those engineered spaces of interviews and recruitment and things like that. So we're trying to ask a whole bunch of questions, really kind of very pointed questions around if people felt that they'd experienced racism in the workplace before, as real, really basic starting point for a conversation for us. We also had some consultants come in, and we worked really closely with them to do some very specific, I keep going back to the specificity idea around anti-racist training and biases and things like that. And for some people, I talk about that all day in my daily work. For other people in the organisation, these are new ideas, and they're kind of, everybody's got different starting points for it. But with this idea of having the balance data and the belonging data together to explore what had come before and what we've been, then we can start having the conversations of where we want to be and who we want to be and how we want to be as well. I don't think you can separate one from the other. I don't think it's possible.
Absolutely. Thank you all for that. Isra, I kind of wanted to come to you as I'm quite interested to hear about your perspective as somebody who is a person of colour working with often kind of white-led organisations. Have you felt that the working or the power dynamic has shifted over these kind of past 2 years in relation to anti-racism?
Sure. Yes, there are a few things to say about this. It's the fact that TAPE has been running for 6 years. And I do think that and obviously there's been a bit of a boom in the past year and a half, and that might be because I left my job and started focusing on TAPE, or it might have been because I suppose people conflated what we do to be aligned with the changes they had to make, which is a really sad realization to make, because the work was always there and the work was always excellent and the work was always great and impactful. But it's only recently that I think what we did was taken seriously. And when organizations started realizing, or venues started realizing that it might actually, you know, everyone we've worked with has been great, but in terms of it actually might serve the space. And that the fact that they, you know, you've got these collectives and small organizations doing the work already, it doesn't hurt to bring them in and to help widen the audience. So yeah, that's one thing. And also, I'm also in a place, which is part pettiness and part resentment, where I don't have to work with anyone I don't want to work with. So the spaces that we work with are people that let us do what we want. So I've been very fortunate in terms of not feeling like we have to compromise or necessarily we really want to work with spaces that do want to do better. And obviously the way that we recognize that hasn't been through statements, it's just been through conversations. The way that I've recognized whether a programmer actually cares about what we're doing has been through a conversation and seeing what else they've done. So I'm quite precious about where we take our program or where we take our sort of events, and that's often just being comfortable with the space. And the space might not be perfect in terms of who the audience is, and the outreach might not be complete, but at least they're trying. And another thing that I was thinking about recently was that we currently have 2 programs on tour. One which is about identity and heritage, which is called Baweri From, and the other one is Touched, which we're doing with Invisible Women. And Touched is about female and non-binary sexuality and desire. Selling them has been such a different experience, or getting them into venues has been such a different experience, because Baweri From has been quite not hard work, but harder work than Touched. And I was thinking about why that might be. Where Touched is actually a program that we've had to cap because it was almost too popular to get into spaces. And I think that maybe that's because cinemas are women-led, maybe, or there's, you know, and that's sort of an easier thing to take on and an easier thing to put on and present yourself with and represent. But Where You're From is very much, you know, it's about racial diversity, which is, if you don't have the team in place or the outreach in place, might be a trickier thing to put on and present yourself. So when I say in terms of a harder sell, it's more about the work we've had to do to make sure that people show up, that people, you know, it gets watched, all those kind of things. And I think also trying to confirm the fact that this is something that people need to believe in. We then just work even harder to make sure that it's a success. But yeah, there's definitely been a shift. I mean, short answer is yes, there's definitely been a shift, and it's a tricky and a sensitive one, because it's great that we get to do all those things, but it's really, really sad in terms of how it came about, and if it is related in terms of the new direction of organisation of venues.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's really hard to know for sure, and I guess you just have to figure it out and sense from conversations, because people can say all of the right things, but if that's actually followed up by action is a whole other kind of conversation. Thank you for sharing that. Tony, I kind of wanted to come to you next and ask about your role and how it's, as you being someone who supports kind of embedding more inclusive practices in the region's creative sector, have you felt that there's been a change in the kind of support organisations are looking for, or what they're thinking about in terms of anti-racism?
Absolutely. I think there's a really interesting thing, so since you asked me that question, I've been thinking about it a lot. And I think actually a thing that's changed a lot is our confidence with calling people out for not being more inclusive in the work that they do. So actually what happens is you end up having a very different conversation with the people that you're working with, because we do ask a lot more questions now about kind of the diversity of teams and the co-creation processes and who your audiences are and how you've considered those and how you've got to the point that you're getting to. And I think that we've become a lot more pointed in kind of in demanding that kind of stuff. So we give out pots of funding to support research and prototypes. There's a power in that, actually, that we can help shape cohorts and things like that. And I definitely feel like we're asking more questions. And so as a result, a lot of the questions on the other end become a lot more about, especially for small organizations, and I go back to that point about people at very different points in their inclusion journeys. Small organizations who've never had to consider inclusion before, now being told that, well, if you want to work with us, then you have to consider all of these new things, can be really big, and in a really exciting, positive way. I mean, that it's a great space to be able to go, well, unless you start thinking a little bit more about how you're co-creating, how can you grow your audiences for this work? How can you engage more people in the process of the creation of your work? Then this might not be the space for you, I think, is a really big challenge that we're putting out to people that we didn't put out before. On the other end, I think that there's a lot of people now who are focusing more in exactly the same way on process rather than product. There's a lot of the researchers that we are working with at the moment are very much looking at the idea of how we work together and kind of what that looks like, and kind of how we call them pathfinders. Our next theme is all around international collaboration. It's called Here and There. So I'm talking specifically about Bristol and Bath R&D, which is a program that I work on, and that. Yeah, so that is all about this idea of what does international collaboration look like? How do we have exchange between people in different communities, in different settings, in different contexts and things like that? And it's going to be a really interesting set of questions around, well, what does equity look like in this situation? How do we make sure that everybody is properly equipped to have these conversations and be in spaces together and work in that kind of a way? And I think that language of kind of process and things like that is all the more at the forefront of the work than it's ever been, I think. It's got to be off the back of all of everybody made those massive proclamations in a bit of a panic a little while ago, and now this is the hard work. All of a sudden now I'm going, well, where is your diversity? What does that look like? And that's where the friction in the best possible way is happening at the moment, I think.
Yeah, it's quite exciting actually that enables you to have different kinds of conversations, I think, and the kinds of conversation we should have been having a long time ago, but at least it's happening now. Rosha, I was wondering if you could kind of expand a bit on, I know you mentioned earlier about going through like an 18-month long process, developing a program and working around kind of anti-racism. And specifically, if you could speak to how people of colour were kind of given agency in that process.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that our organisation really went through a lot during that time, in the sense that we started kind of we went to some consultants and planned this kind of 3-day unconscious bias training that everybody in the team would go through. And we did, or maybe it was 4 days it was supposed to be, but anyway, it was quite finite and it was quite boundaried. And then after this, we did 2, and there was staff on board there, and there were a bunch of things that came up with that. You know, it started off quite gentle, but even still, there was a sense of like ripples, and then the pandemic happened, and everything was kind of closed, was shut down. And we had been supposed to do our 3rd day with those consultants like the week of the 20th of March or something. And what we did with them is they were wonderful in the sense that they worked with us to kind of reimagine how we would continue to do this work. And what ended up happening is that they broke down those day-long sessions into a much longer, with space in between, kind of series of 1 and 2 hour long sessions. And we ended up continuing that so that it went on for about a year. And what it allowed was for us to have space in between to do homework, to process some thoughts. And it fostered in quite an organic way, because I think at the same time, like we were doing that work with Melanie Ishrin, and then June 2020 happened and George Floyd was murdered, and the sense of urgency was like really, really present. And for my colleagues who are people of colour, there was this absolute sense of understanding the need for this work to be prioritised. And then Melanie Ishrin responded really well to that. And what we did is we created these 3 teams within our team, which we called Race Resolutions team. So there was a recruitment and retention race resolutions team, a governance and leadership team, and a programming and marketing team. There was another one which was about training, and the training one kind of got subsumed into the programming and marketing one. And actually what that meant was that each of those teams were able to kind of focus on what needed to happen and change. And it made the work really tangible and concrete. And there was a sense as well of that, of everybody within the organization being able to, through that dispersed kind of mechanism, really be present in the work. And I think also as it was happening, then what was happening is our team was changing and the way that we were working was also changing. And through the work in the governance and leadership team that we were doing, the board was changing. So that sense of everything happening at the same time and in a slower way really contributed to that kind of collaborative spirit. At the same time, we were doing a strategic review of our organization, and that was led by an artist of color. So that sense of provocation was coming to us in a number of different ways, really rethinking everything we were doing as an organization and where our values sat and how we were going to change what we did, how we did it, and who was going to be involved, both from an artist perspective, our own kind of team, and then also in terms of our engagement with different and diverse audiences. And those audiences for us are like locally, nationally, and internationally. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. But it kind of leads me to have a kind of a follow-up question, which is related to how do you, in that kind of process, how do you support your staff members of colour and people of colour that you're working with kind of externally?
Yeah, because one of the things you asked was around agency, and I would say like it's difficult for me to answer that with a kind of honesty because I am white. I'm Irish and I'm not from here, and that sense of coming into that like I suppose there's advantages to that and also disadvantages. But I would say that like what we have done to that end is that now, as part of our recruitment and retention work, every member of our team can access coaching to kind of and mentorship to deal with working in a majority white environment. So that's one way. I think in that sense of agency, I would hope that there is a sense of active participation in this work at that kind of team level. I think that the NVC work that we've done assists us in being able to name issues as they arise. I think the fact that we now have a board that is more than 50% POC is also a kind of, hopefully, I hope, indicates a sense of like leadership and governance, and that the routes to kind of to dealing with any issues as they arise. I think something where we've with around recruitment, one of the things that we've noticed is that like we've done an awful lot of work in recruitment around making sure that our recruitment panels are representative, that the places where we advertise our jobs are much more diverse, that there is kind of that our job packs are clearer and more honest around who we are and where we're going as an organization and understanding that space. And the response has been really strong from people coming to interview, where people are saying to us, this is the first time I've been interviewed by a panel that is global majority. And those kind of things have been really great. But at the same time, you know, we recently, my co-CEO, Deborah Chadbourne, is leaving the organization. And we recently went about a big recruitment process for an executive director for the organization. And we worked really hard on the pack. We made sure that we were really clear, like we engaged in consultation around perceived barriers that there might have been within the pack from an organization that is historically only been led by white women, to try and make sure that if there were any blind spots that we had around what was in that pack, around making sure that the job was accessible to people who mightn't have seen themselves in that role within our organization, were kind of addressed. And we sought a lot of support and expertise. We worked really hard at the advertising for the role, and then in the end we were, I suppose, you know, we didn't see the result in terms of the applications that we'd hoped in terms of the diversity of the pool of applicants, and that was really difficult, and something that we're now, I mean, we've made an excellent appointment, but we have appointed a white man, and I think the next phase for us will be reflecting on that and kind of looking at what's going on. And I mean, I was really shocked to then find out that 2% of executive directors in the arts, one of my colleagues found the statistic, 2% of executive directors in the arts are people of colour in the UK, which is just like really, really shocking. So thinking about, well, what are we going to do now? Like what's our response to that in terms of our own activities moving forward? And I don't know what that is yet, but it's definitely good. You'll see it, we'll feel it in whatever the milestones are for our kind of continually co-created anti-racism strategy as we move forwards.
I think that issue that you're having then, and this isn't a question for the panel, just something to kind of reflect on more widely, because I'm not sure there is an answer, but it points to a wider issue that I think is quite obvious considering the past kind of 5-10 years and the hyper focus on getting people of colour into entry level positions and then there not being a progression route. So now what you're probably facing is loads of people of colour who just feel like they haven't had the progression route in their careers to be able to go for roles that are higher up. And it's, I mean, that Inc. Arts report showed that people are organisations are finding people to sit on their boards that are people of colour, but actually the executive teams aren't being as ethnically diverse and it's harder to fill those positions with people of colour. And I think it's really important to, in a moment of accountability, understand that isn't that there aren't people of colour who wouldn't be equipped. It's just a reflection of the lack of support that has happened and where we need to catch up kind of with that. Just wanting to go to Shauna now before I open up to audience questions. Could you share, Shauna, how Glasgow Film have been approaching the development of its anti-racism processes?
Sure. So very much a work in progress. You know, as I said earlier, we definitely feel like we're absolutely at the very beginning. But maybe something that you said, Rosha, there about what we're trying to really embed about the whole process is harnessing a collaborative spirit with it. This isn't something that I, as a white woman, am doing in a closed office. I'm very much trying to make sure it's as cross-organisational as possible. And actually tangibly how we're doing that is that we've worked with 2 consultants recently who helped shape a process of conversation, training and action planning across the organisation. And so that those events and conversations have involved all staff, lots of our volunteer pool, members of the board as well. And now we have a report which is very kind of forward facing. They did look back and look at the evidence we hold, the data we have on impact, audiences, staff, etc., and looked at our current policies and have commented on things that need to improve. So there's things for us to do there to be better. But it's very kind of forward focusing. How do we build on sort of good practice that we have already in other areas of the business and start to maybe embed that across the organisation. And one of the key things for them was obviously moving from intent to action. Yes, there's commitment and across the staff to do more and do better. How do we actually give the staff the time and resources to participate in that work? So that's kind of where we're at in terms of the approach we're taking. And now the next step is to reflect with as many of that group of people as possible on the findings of the report. So we've got a variety of opportunities for the staff to do that. The senior managers are having a discussion about it. The board are having a specific meeting to sort of delve into the findings of it in detail. All staff will come together in May when we do a kind of quarterly all staff session. And then I'm trying to look at how do we keep that daily conversation about anti-racism, but also wider equalities work, so that it does become a sort of daily practice for everybody, and everybody's trying to think, should be thinking about it in their own role, in their own sort of day-to-day activities, whilst we then look at, right, we need to do some work on our recruitment. What are the barriers in our current recruitment processes that we might be able to try to improve, and start to drive forward things that will require a bit more sort of focused resources of the organisation. And then I kind of think another thing that I want to make sure we keep doing, and don't forget about, is involving Black or minority ethnic experts at every step of the way, because we are a predominantly white-led organisation. And although my Black and POC colleagues are involved in conversations and do sit on some committees and things with us, we are a predominantly white organisation, and we have the resources to be able to do that. So we will continue to bring in different consultants and different experts to give us that expert support as we go through it. That's where we're at the moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. I've just got an audience member's question, so I will read that out for you all. So this person is saying, a question that I have for the panel is whether you think the statements that were made kind of off the back of the resurgence of BLM have translated into disruptive and formative action. They feel like a lot of the actions taken forward always hinge on the comfort of white people and white staff in majority white organisations. There is also a lack of accountability generally. How do you avoid this when our funding is tied to government through publicly funded bodies? Tony?
Thanks. This is a question that I'm actively thinking about at the moment. So I'm really excited to try and answer it. So the programme that I work on is funded through the AHRC. And so I came into the role probably about a third of the way through the programme. So they were all written, the KPIs were already there, structure and the power structures, everything were in place. And I find that I spent a lot of my time asking questions about, well, if we could do it differently, or if we started from a different point, or if this had been considered before we began, and a lot of my sentences started like that when I started in the role. Mm-hmm. So actually, a lot of my work now is data gathering. I'm just about to embark on some research projects with some partners to explore various bits of inclusion practice and things like that, with an aim specifically to go back to funders. I think there's a real key organisation to be had here with the people that are the architects of the funds that we all apply to. Because so if we can get people like the Big Lottery and the Arts Council to ask more questions about what inclusive governance looks like before you even begin to sketch out what your activity is, we'll be in a better place. And kind of engineering it from above like that, I think is it's the quickest route to it, I think, actually, to ask, well, if you want this funding, if you want this resource, then here is a whole bunch of things that you've got to consider. So that's what I'm actively looking at. I welcome anybody to come and have a chat with me about it.
Does anyone else on the panel have anything to add?
I would just say this is something that we think about all the time, and I don't know that there isn't it's not to shortcut an answer, but it is a really, really difficult question. And I think that the way to counter it is that sense of checking in all of the time and trying to promote structures of accountability. And I understand that sense of the difference between governance and kind of executive management that you talked about, but also I do think there is something in the sense of like the governance of the organization is the ultimate space of responsibility for the organization, and actually not that we need to put that white people need to put the burden of making of people of the global majority on their boards then being the people who are responsible, have the burden of like the accountability of the white people who are salaried. Mm-hmm. But I do think there is something around like that's something to be aware of, but at the same time, that sense of like who is ultimately responsible and who are we responsible to, and what are the structures and mechanisms for keeping ourselves in check and making sure that progress is happening is really central to that. And I think the question of white comfort within that is a really good question, and that's one that it's worth considering every day.
Just to add as well is that I think it's important to remember just how disruptive do we need spaces to be, and like how realistic is it for any organization that is white-led or, you know, an organization that's properly core funded is like, what are we asking for? And that's why a lot of the disruption and sort of more radical programming or thinking or in terms of just having conversations isn't going to be as contrived. And so I always try to sort of balance what I'm asking for and what I'm expecting. And actually, I have no interest in begging anyone to change or like wanting anyone to sort of get it or be like a little bit more out there, because actually I can do that work and I'll just find a space that is willing to facilitate that and host it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on something really important there, Isra, which is that I think different kind of people's role in anti-racism is different. I think the job of people of colour working with anti-racism is different to the job of white people, and I think often people forget that a lot of anti-racism work for white people is dismantling white supremacy within themselves and within their white colleagues, because you are in a position that you are able to challenge in a way that a person of colour will never be able to challenge another white person on their how they've internalized white supremacy and how they're enacting that. So there are different jobs for kind of different people. I think we've got time for one more audience question. So somebody has asked, one thing when it comes to kind of having ethnically diverse teams is that such teams often feel quite flat in terms of class, for example. So that's, I guess, a question on kind of intersectionality and how we make sure that people of colour with other marginalisation or marginalised identities are benefiting from this work. It's a hard question.
One of the things that that my colleagues at Unlimited, which is a program we co-deliver with Shape Arts, have done is they've created in the last round of Unlimited commissions, they created the way that they were doing monitoring. They for the first time created a metric that pointed towards intersectionality, that like basically that took intersectionality into account, so that they were able to like look at I mean, with their eye, it was specifically around like what other barriers are disabled artists facing, and what other things will they have encountered. And I suppose that would be for us a really interesting kind of first step in that regard, is to actually be able to understand. I mean, of course, the results were that disabled artists in general are also facing other barriers, like overwhelmingly facing a number, I think it was at least 2 other barriers. They were measured against kind of a number of different other factors. So I think that's the kind of first base is monitoring, but it's, yeah, that's.
One of the recommendations for us, and one that we will definitely prioritise and talk further about across the teams, is the need for us to have a better understanding across the organisation of, you know, taking an intersectional approach. You know, so like our programmes that we run at the moment across different equalities, you know, we need to maybe let's refresh how we're looking at those as well, and widen the impact of the stuff that we're already doing. And that's definitely been flagged to us as something that we need to learn more about and do more on. So.
Yes, we go for it.
Yeah. Tony, feel free to.
Okay, yeah, so sorry. So as part of the data collection that we did, Layla Barron led on it. I've been using the word balance for it, and it's specifically for this reason, because it's not about single demographics and kind of understanding things in silos. We don't come to work with one single demographic hat on. We come with a million different bits of our identities and the things that make us up as people. So what we've been trying to do is look at this idea of what balance looks like across an organisation, and it's very much built around this idea of intersectional identities and us existing in more than one space and being more than one thing, so having more than one set of needs and wants and things like that as well off the top of it. I don't think that you can explore race without class. The two things are so deeply intertwined, like there's a long, big, complicated history behind that one, isn't there? The strategy to address it, so we've been looking, so all of this, the data collection that we've been doing and some of the training that we did were leading towards departmental plans for each department and each bit of the organisation at Watershed. We're looking, and the reason that they're different for different bits is because the needs of each team is different, and the kind of the skill sets that they need within each team and the makeup of each team and the recruitment methods are all different as well. So for that reason, each team has has got their own bit of data to look at, to explore and really interrogate for themselves, what does balance look like in our team and what could we do to change that balance and what would that need. So there's deep conversations ongoing, and we'll be sharing some more about that in due course as well. I promise it'll be out there.
So I'm going to kind of wrap us up, and I hope that you can kind of all join me in thanking all of our panelists. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully it's given you loads of food for thought for the next part of the session, which is going to be breakout rooms. Thank you all so much, and yeah, I hope you enjoy the next part of your session.